After my previous Last of Us Part 2 video, Did Joel Deserve Better?, I've decided to take another look at yet another one of Naughty Dog's biggest risks taken in The Last of Us Part 2. And no, I'm not talking about that scene, as I covered that in a previous video. In this video, we will be talking about Abby. I'm going to do a full analysis on the character and determine whether Naughty Dog's risks to make her the second playable character paid off. As usual, this video will contain spoilers from this point. Now I will not deny, Abby is certainly a divisive character, and I don't think she was intended to be. She was developed to be a character that you are meant to connect with, empathise with. She is there to prove to the player that no character in this world is good or bad, which is fine as long as the characters show some of these traits themselves, and I'll get into that later. We start playing as Abby very early into the game. We didn't really know much about her. We'd only seen her in some short trailers that were released ahead of the game's launch. When we first gain control of her, she's in a lodge with a group of people. These people, as well as Abby, are from a much larger group, called the Washington Liberation Front, or abbreviated as the WLF. Abby joined their cause after the collapse of the Fireflies. Abby gets up and chats to a character we later learn as Owen, and go off out in the snow to see what he had discovered on his own earlier. A lot of people in the community thought Abby was actually Ellie's mum, and we figured this would be some sort of backstory. I myself was convinced for a while. But once we reached the summit and I dialed in on the conversation, I knew what was going on. They were overlooking Jackson. I knew they were after Joel. I knew they were ex-Fireflies, and I knew there would be something to do with the hospital. I knew Joel has to have killed someone close to Abby. I know the game tries to keep it hush-hush at this moment in the narrative, but I saw straight past it. But I knew how Neil Druckmann's writing works. I figured I could be wrong, and I tried to give Abby the benefit of the doubt, but I still wasn't entirely sure of her motives, or completely sure or trusting of her character at this point. She seems very hell-bent on getting to this person, who obviously is Joel. So she abandons Owen and goes off to the Jackson outpost, after Owen bottling it and explaining that his girlfriend is pregnant, which Abby isn't too happy about. As it would appear, sometime in the past, they were love interests. I did gather this by some of the flirty dialogue on the way to the Overlook. Owen also tries to explain that once the rest of their crew sees the size of Jackson, they will turn back, as quite clearly they are outnumbered. This agitates Abby, and like I aforementioned, goes after the outpost on her own. It is at this point we switch between Ellie out on patrol and Abby on her route to the outpost. Coincidentally, Joel and Tommy are out on patrol too. Whilst out on her journey, Abby triggers a fair-sized horde of runners and clickers to start pursuing her. I have mentioned this before in my previous Last of Us Part 2 videos, but she runs in literally any direction and manages to bump into Joel and Tommy. Amazing, right? Bear in mind here, when she got pinned by the runner, it is Joel, and I say this again, Joel saves her life. Got that? Joel saves Abby's life. She then helps Joel and Tommy escape by offering them the shelter at her group's lodge. Of course, we know what happens here. She begins to torture Joel, eventually resulting in his death. Of course, us the player have no idea why she wanted him dead. Some of us, like myself, did have an idea, and since we are now into spoiler territory, I might as well say it. Abby tortured and murdered Joel because he is the man who killed her father. Her father was the surgeon whom Joel killed in the Firefly Hospital in order to save Ellie 4 years earlier. And again, at this point in the narrative, we have no idea as to why Abby did this. So us, the original players, who spent nearly 10 years with this character at this point, has been murdered by a character we've known for literally 5 minutes. And Neil Druckmann couldn't understand why the players were immediately hateful towards Abby, and unfortunately, the actress who portrayed her. I'll happily admit myself, I was in shock, disbelief as to how badly this was executed, more from the writer's standpoint. Their intentions are for us to empathise with this character about 10 to 12 hours from now, after what she's just done. There was always going to be a divided opinion on that, especially if you played the first game. Furthermore, where was Abby's sympathy or empathy? Bear in mind, Joel saved her life. Not once did she stop and think, wait a minute, this monster I've been imagining for years, all the sleepless nights, the 4 years of training in order to take him down. He just saved my life. Has he changed? Should I confront him as to why he killed my father? Have I even tortured the right Joel? There may be 2 different Joels living in Jackson. Okay, well, that last sentence might be a stretch, but you get my point. Like I said in my video about Joel, what he did at the hospital was definitely not forgivable. But Abby herself knew that her father was going to perform a fatal surgery on Ellie with no consent. Joel had no choice. Her father also did pull a scalpel on Joel, so it was partly self-defense. Like I say, even way before this scene, I did take a rough guess as to what story the writers were going to tell. I knew they'd go for this option, as it's generally an easy story to tell. Well, usually anyway. I just can't get my head around to the fact that Neil thought this was a good approach. Well, I know it's not all Neil's fault, but I'm assuming, considering this is his franchise, he would have the final decision when it comes to the game's direction. I personally would have liked to have seen Abby and her group work their way into Jackson, disguised as the usual survivors that Jackson takes in. Abby already knew who Tommy was, due to them both being ex-Fireflies. She would obviously recognise Ellie, and being a similar age to her, she could build some rapport with her, and get close to Joel, and even maybe, just maybe, become very close to Ellie as well as Joel, and then play out the demise of Joel that way, with also showing what happened to Abby's dad beforehand. I think it would have worked out much better for the writers that way. But the scenes that were delivered were all for the shock factor. The only redeeming act Abby does is that she spares Tommy and Ellie in this scene. We don't actually see Abby again for like, say, 10 to 12 hours later, depending on how quickly you get through Ellie's journey in Seattle. Talking of Ellie's journey, we spend around a total of 3 days in Seattle with Ellie, as she slaughters through Abby's friends that were present at Joel's death, and might I mention, when she confronts them, most of them show no remorse. She tracks them down in order to track Abby down. Ellie travelled there with her partner Dina. They set up base at an abandoned theatre. On Ellie's 3rd day, she finds a lead to Abby at an aquarium. She only finds Mel and Owen there. She tries to get answers out of them as to where Abby is, but Owen lunges for Ellie's firearm, which in turn doesn't end well for them. Ellie massacres them and heads back to the theatre, but whilst leaving her map there. Of course, once Abby returns, she tracks Ellie down to the theatre, ambushes Tommy and confronts Ellie right after shooting Jesse, who I might add had nothing to do with this situation. Yes, he may have killed members of Abby's group, but as far as I know he had nothing to do with the death of her close friends. Again, how are we supposed to even come close to feeling some sort of empathy for this character, when all she does is blast people in the face, whether it's with a golf club or a firearm? Notice Ellie's reaction in the aquarium when she killed Mel. She showed remorse, even though she was a part of Joel's demise. Abby, on the other hand, shows no remorse whatsoever. Another strange choice I didn't understand, and again, I have mentioned this before, but why didn't Abby just explain to Ellie as to why she wanted Joel dead? I mean, yes, Ellie did say, "I know why you killed Joel." Maybe Abby thought Ellie learned as to why Abby did it through her friends she hunted down and murdered. However, I think Ellie surmised that Abby is after Ellie because Joel took their chances of a cure away. Ellie thinks Abby is after the cure. This is how I analysed it anyway. Getting back on track though, again, if the writers want us to get behind Abby as a character, this would have been a good point for Abby to at least explain to Ellie, and maybe even show a little remorse, maybe even have Abby empathise with Ellie. Have Abby say to Ellie she knows exactly how she feels, but no, instead she does this.
Hands in the air, I shoot this one too.
Don't you do it, Ellie. Get out of here.
Stand up, now!
Don't you fucking dare.
Shut the fuck up! Fuck. All right, stop! Stop! Toss your weapon. Toss your weapon! Fuck.
No.
I know why you killed Joel. He did what he did to save me. There is no cure because of me. I am the one that you want. Just let him go. You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it.
We are then left on a cliffhanger and forced to spend 12 odd hours, depending on how quickly you play, playing as Abby. We go through Abby's entire backstory to build the character. The writers are attempting to win you over. The most important part of Abby's playthrough is obviously the first minutes, the fact that her dad was the surgeon that was going to operate on Ellie. I do understand they are showing the other side of the story, again showing that truly no one is evil in this world. If we were to follow this whole franchise in Abby's shoes, we would see Joel as the villain, and the game is trying to show that. And I understand it, but it's just the direction and execution the writers took. The rest is just filler in my opinion, but I will briefly go over it. What I did notice in day one of Abby's Seattle journey, in the opening scene, she is having trouble sleeping still, showing to us that murdering Joel has changed nothing for her. The revenge wasn't worth it. In this scene, she is called up to her superior Isaac, who is the leader of the WLF. She is being placed on the front line, on an attack against their rival militia, the Seraphites, in Seattle. She has to travel to a forward base in order to see him. She makes the journey with Alice the dog, Manny, and Mel. Now can someone please explain to me why the WLF would let a pregnant woman out into the field? Seriously, not a good idea. Because as you can see in this footage, we get ambushed by the Seraphites, resulting in Mel getting wounded. When arriving to the forward base, even Abby states that Mel shouldn't be out there. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about Mel. Abby heads up to see Isaac after seeing Danny's body, whoever Danny is. This makes her concerned as to where Owen is. Once reaching Isaac, we find out.
I heard you two ran into some trouble.
No losses on our side, just some minor injuries. Can't say the same for them.
Wish I was hearing more of that.
Never seen the base this packed.
I'm gonna give it another day. Still waiting on some units.
What's going on, boss?
These small skirmishes. Can't keep going like this.
Then... what?
We could try another truce. But how long before some asshole on their side or our side unravels the whole thing? No. It has to be all of them.
Sir, we'll try attacking their island.
Not like this. Not with everyone. There's a big storm a few days out. We're gonna use it to mask our approach. You two are gonna lead the first wave. Pick your squads, start prepping.
I want Owen. When are he and Danny getting back?
Who talked, Nora? No secrets between the Salt Lake crew, huh?
Is Owen okay?
As far as I know.
Then why didn't you send a search party after him?
He shot Danny. Apparently to protect some scar.
It's bullshit.
Excuse me?
That's not Owen. You got it wrong.
You're saying Danny used his last breath to lie to me?
Sir, people hear that story. Owen's dead. Anyone who finds him, they'll gun him down for sport.
Then I suggest you all stop gossiping about it.
Let me go after him. I'll walk him back in. We'll get to the bottom.
No.
You said yourself the storm's a few
No.
days.
We've only got one shot at this. And this is bigger than any of us. Definitely bigger than Owen. If he turns up, then fine. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And we'll get to the bottom of it. I need you, Abby. Yeah?
Yeah. I get it.
Good. Look over the plans and go through your roster. Grab some food. We'll talk later.
No way Owen killed Danny over some scar, right? What? No. Abby, don't.
I'll be back by morning. You just gotta cover me till then.
Isaac will kick your ass.
Not before the assault. You heard him, he needs me.
If Owen's out there, how the hell are you going to find him?
I know where he'll go.
So as you saw, Owen has gone AWOL after shooting Danny to protect some Seraphite kids. So this is Abby's 3 days in Seattle. She heads off to find Owen. There are multiple flashbacks in Ellie's journey that show her relationship with Owen and foreshadows where he has fled to, the aquarium. But of course, to get there, she has to cross through Seraphite territory. This results in her getting captured by the Seraphites and strung up, until she is saved by two child defectors, Yara and Lev. Now this is another branch of Abby's narrative, to help these defectors get to safety, which I will defend Abby on. It was the morally right thing to do. Now at first she decides to leave them in a trailer, then go back to the aquarium to get intimate with Owen. Which I may remind you, Owen is actually with Mel. Abby knew this, but proceeded anyway. They're both as bad as each other in this scene, but again, how can you empathise with her if she pulls acts like this? The only thing I noticed, when Abby awoke from the usual nightmare at the hospital, of Yara and Lev hanging there, again it proves she is still not at peace, even after killing Joel. which by the way is never spoken of again by any of the characters, not even Abby. Anyway, Abby feels she must go back to save them. Maybe this was her way of redeeming herself after what she's done, because after she brings them back to the aquarium, she also goes off on a trek with Lev to acquire parts for an operation that Mel must perform on Yara, as her arm was shattered by the Seraphites back when Abby was captured. Again, she is trying to redeem herself. Also notice in these segments, Abby gets all the best gameplay and guns, whilst Ellie gets practically nothing. Again, this isn't really going in Abby's favour in order to win over skeptical players. Once she reaches Nora's hospital, she has to go down into the depths of the basement, which hasn't been cleared yet. She is also warned that this was Ground Zero, where the first infected were brought almost 25 years ago at this point. Abby knows this might be a one-way ticket, but decides to take it on anyway, which I actually commend her for. Again, like I just mentioned, she has the best gameplay scenarios. She has to single-handedly take on the Rat King. Once she takes down the Rat King, she returns to the aquarium with the supplies, so that Mel can complete the procedure. She goes to sleep off screen, and we're back in the hospital dream sequence. No alarms are ringing. Abby is not running or holding a gun. She enters the theatre and sees not Yara and Lev hanging there. Instead, her dad is alive, showing that she is now finally at peace. This mirrors Ellie's journey. She also only saw Joel before his demise. It is not until she is trying to kill Abby that she sees Joel alive and realises that she is at peace. And at this point, I did feel slightly remorseful for Abby, but I started to realise that she may not be the monster we all thought she was. What the writers did with Abby in these early Seattle days worked. I did see Abby was trying to redeem herself. Even though I wasn't at all invested or even interested in Yara and Lev, I liked the fact Abby was helping them, even as much as betraying her own faction. But the writers turn it on its head again. I'm now jumping back to the cliffhanger scene in the theatre. She literally undoes all the good she did. She ambushed Tommy and shot Jesse dead, and is now holding Ellie at gunpoint. Tommy tries to apprehend Abby, but he gets an arrow to the leg by Lev, and he is shot in the head by Abby. I think myself and other players were done with Abby at this point in our first playthroughs. Then of course, the final boss fight, well, part 1, starts between Abby and Ellie. I've mentioned this before in other Last of Us Part 2 videos, but this was a kick in the teeth for original players. We didn't want to have to attack Ellie like this. She is a character we had spent 8 years with at this point, but obviously, being a linear game, all we can do is watch. Abby literally beats Ellie and Dina single-handedly, but she also left them alive, in which I was thankful for. But it was silly of Abby to leave them alive. Ellie already came after her once, she's bound to do it again. With Abby sparing Ellie and Dina, this was probably her only redeeming quality thus far. The epilogue of the game picks up about a year later. Abby and Lev are in Santa Barbara, as Owen, earlier on in the narrative, believed that there were the last remaining members of the Fireflies stationed there. The writers obviously have tried to recreate a Joel and Ellie out of Abby and Lev, and for me, it just didn't work. Their chemistry just wasn't there like it was for Joel and Ellie. The pair eventually get captured by the new enemy faction, the Rattlers. I'd say, a month later, Ellie is now not too far behind. She did eventually decide to track Abby down. Ellie infiltrates the Rattlers' hideout and finds out Abby is down on the beach, basically crucified. And we know how the scene plays out. Ellie cuts her down, Abby leads them down to the boats, and Ellie decides she wants one last fight to the death. Ellie ends up sparing Abby, allowing herself and Lev to leave in order to find the Fireflies. And just like that, Abby's story is over. I know I did dilute her story, but a lot of her story is filler, as well as the backstory, in which I felt wouldn't be important in this video. In my closing thoughts, I totally understood as to what Abby was supposed to be. She is there to show the other side of the story, that not one character or their choices should be considered as evil. For me, what Abby did to Joel, Jesse, Tommy and Dina cannot be forgiven. Yes, she did have some redeeming qualities, like letting Ellie live twice and also helping out Yara and Lev. No matter how many times I replay the game, I still dislike the character. I always try to give her the benefit of the doubt, but she never really knows what she wants to be. Similar to how Ellie behaved in her narrative. I mentioned this in my video, The Betrayal of Ellie. That Ellie did not know whether she wanted to revenge or not, because every time she killed one of Abby's crew, she almost resented it. Abby is similar. She doesn't know whether she wants to perhaps redeem herself after what happened at the lodge, but at the same time she guns down Tommy and Jesse with no hesitation. Laura Bailey did a very good job on portraying this character. The backlash she received upon the game's launch was absurd. I wouldn't be surprised if she turns down reprising the role in Part 3, as I'm very sure there will be another chapter in this franchise. But in my opinion, Abby isn't compelling enough to carry it through on her own. Maybe Ashley Johnson will reprise her role as Ellie, but we can only wait and see. I will admit, like I aforementioned, I do dislike this character. Not just because she killed Joel, but as to how her attitude came across to Joel's demise, as well as the returning characters from Part 1. She showed no empathy or sympathy for any of those characters, not 1 ounce of remorse either. All she cared about was Yara and Lev, and might I remind you, the Seraphites most likely killed many of Abby's friends in the WLF. Yara and Lev might have even killed some themselves. When I had to rerun Abby's section for this video, I did start to understand her a little more. I tried to go in with an open mind, rather than just thinking about getting back to the theatre scene. And I can say that I now think Abby's character could have been more. She truly became a wasted potential. Again, I know what she did had to happen to push on the narrative, but like a lot of the story beats in this game, the biggest issue is the pacing and direction. The opening scenes of the game was way too quick. I think, like I said much earlier on, Abby should have somehow gained access to Jackson and build rapport with Ellie to get to Joel that way. It would have been much more troubling for the players to realise that this character they've actually built an understanding for, who is now Ellie's friend, has now just murdered their father figure. Or it may have the opposite effect, and players might have even been more understanding with Abby, rather than having 12 hours to grind after the event. In summary, Naughty Dog's biggest risk did not pay off, due to their poor direction of the character and their pacing in the prologue. Abby Anderson could have been more, but instead she was a truly missed opportunity.